I will just do a quick round of intro just one more time so you get the context of every person. So obviously, Mini heads Baker McKenzie compliance and investigation across Asia Pac based out of Hong Kong. So she'll give us an external view on compliance, investigations, white collar crime, and it's changing so much. We have Akhil on the other side who's from Boeing, so he'll give you a perspective on the fact that, how does a global company operate in India, especially in defense and aerospace. Everybody thinks it's high risk. I don't. Then we have Ashish, who's a partner at Dua and Associates. Ashish will give us the Indian law thing, so hopefully he can answer all the tough questions. Because whenever it comes to Indian law, we'll say, Ashish, can you please answer? And then we have, of course, the best and the tallest person among our particular panel is Sameet. Sameet is the Vice President, Corporate Law and Company Secretary of DCM Shriram. Any strong board matters or anything where you want to talk about backdating records, etc., we'll ask him how he does it, which I'm sure he doesn't. But I think we'll come right into the thing. And then obviously last is Vineet. Vineet, who managed to get his chair in very sportingly, and I must compliment it, and that's all about humility. I think is the Group General Counsel for Tech Mahindra globally. He deals with so many countries. I think Vineet, you told me 75 countries? 80, 92. Wow, they've expanded. So Vineet, please come to us if you need any help. But anyway, we'll come to back to the panel, and I think in the interest of time, we have 45 minutes. As I said, let's make it interactive. It's a small group. Please ask all the tough questions. So I think I'll start with Sameet first. Sameet, the Prime Minister has come out very strongly around corruption. Every time he speaks, he talks about how he's going to remove corruption in the country. The G20 anti-corruption meet happened in India. I think a lot of ministers spoke about it. So maybe you can set the tone for this panel by starting and talking about the importance of it for the country and the way the government is addressing it.
Thanks. Thank you, Arvinder. I think you rightly mentioned that G20 there was a uh, very detailed agenda in terms of anti-corruption and all. I think our Prime Minister set the tone very rightly in 8 years ago, maybe 2014 only, when he set 9 goals for anti-corruption things. And in this meeting also, this was very effective G20 meeting, which you mentioned actually. And he was focusing, I was listening to him, he was focusing on 3 key things. One is that, the law enforcement agencies to cooperate each other in terms of sharing the data. That's very, very important because when we're talking about, fraud and we're talking about the corruption, particularly in the government area and, country-wise where the fugitives are there. And the second thing was in terms of asset tracing. And that's another very important area because and he was telling us that after the Economic Offender Act, I think they have been able to trace the asset about 2 billion or something. So asset tracing was the second thing which he was focusing, and the third, of course, was the integrity and ethics systems of the government agencies. That's very important, and he was very clear in focusing on these 3 things that this is what we required, and then only we can have a joint operation in terms of combating the corruption, in terms of making the government bodies and other things ethical in terms of that. So I think this was very good communication, effective communication in terms of that. And the Prime Minister was very focused on that in terms of particularly when we have offenders, fugitives in the other countries, how do we cooperate with each other? So this was a great opportunity, and people really agreed. I think all of them, they have been this ministerial meetings on the anti-corruption things for so many years, but they were very clear, and they all said that yes, we really take this as a kind of a commitment that this will be taken in a very holistic manner, that everyone has to cooperate with each other in terms of correcting the in terms of combating the corruption, etc. And one more thing which is very important here is the whistleblower protection policy. And in many countries we have seen that whistleblower has actually become a very useful tool to fight with the corruption. Particularly in India, we are still a long way away in terms of whistleblower, because India we have the legal system, but still people are not coming forward for the whistleblowing, and that's a very useful tool to combat corruption. Because in an organization, particularly if you talk about the private organization where the employees or the stakeholders are much more known to the corruption than any other person. And if they come forward and then, there is always a chances that people will be scared to do any corruption or any this thing. But point is that we have seen many cases wherein the whistleblowers were not protected properly. So therefore, the law now emphasizes that you have to see there is no victimization of the whistleblower. SEBI also talks about that. Companies also Act also talks about that. RBI also talks about that. So that's something which is, I think we are coming very fast in that. But in many countries, we have seen that whistleblower are actually been rewarded like anything. This is a practice area for the lawyers also, and that's really, really helping in combating the corruption internationally, I think. So I think we really have to work on that area. That whistleblower policies and whistleblower mechanisms should be improved, should be very effective in India. And how we can make effective that, we have to educate people. We have to tell them that this is a tool which everyone should try to come forward. People are still scared of coming forward for the whistleblowing, and because we have seen many cases. Infosys ka case humne dekha, and then we seen the case of NHAI, which was very, very important case where the people were actually harassed and all. So people are still not very comfortable coming forward. And the problem people are facing is that there are anonymous complaints. How do you investigate the anonymous complaint if someone doesn't give you the name or the detail? It's very difficult. So the protection of whistleblower is very important in India. It's going to be very, very effective tool for combating corruption if we can actually ensure that whistleblower are feeling very, very comfortable in coming up and giving this complaints. And it's a very effective tool, I would say.
Thank you so much for that, Samit. I think whistleblowing, I do believe in. Everybody would have heard about the SEBI LODR requirements, obviously, which makes it mandatory for listed entities. I think now with the fact that the Institute of Chartered Accountants, I don't know how many of you have seen it, has come out with standards for forensic accounting. So all of us have got a lot of regulations on us. In fact, my boss was asking me the other day that which law doesn't apply to us, so so it's become pretty onerous. So we need lawyers more and more. If I can go to Akhil next, Akhil, there's been the whole Indian Penal Code. So I think the government's really come out with changes. I think they're running out of time or something, or maybe elections are coming up. I don't know, but they've changed the Indian Penal Code. Now they've introduced, different statutes. They replaced the Indian Penal Code, the Code of Criminal Procedures, and the Indian Evidence Acts. Can you comment on that, on how that's going to change the legal fraternity and how we do work?
No, I think that's a fantastic move because uh, and when you see the preamble, I think the preamble is because of digitalization and information technology. Why the lawmakers believe that the criminal law should also change. It's a welcome step, but I think the devil lies in the detail. The laws are still will go to a standing committee, and the standing committee will evaluate what changes are necessary. But I definitely do believe that there is always scope of change. There is always scope of improvement. But some of the things, which are very, very still a lot of problematic in our country is the enforcement of law. The other session we were talking about enforcement of a contract. But if we look at the criminal law, I think the way it is being used today has to be, though we may have a law, which is a new criminal law, but we have to really see the sedition law, or we have to really see the freedom of speech. So if the new law works within the framework of the Constitution of India, that is something which I would like to see. So we may put up a law, but if it is used to curb freedom of speech, we have seen instances in this country, it's a great country. The business dynamics are strong. The business will propel it forward. The leadership has a very positive mindset to grow India into a multi-trillion dollar economy, a multiplier. But all that also comes with, when you read the headlines every day, things that are happening in Manipur, I think those kind of things is something we should be very, very careful about, because that also is sending some perception to somebody outside of India. So criminal law change, definitely a positive step. The other thing, we have seen, for example, women's safety. We have seen the self-regulating mechanism which has come under the POSH Act, crime against women. I think corporate sector has done some fantastic work here, because all these companies are now required to have a POSH committee and ICC. I think there should be a similar thought, looking at some good examples, how these have worked in a positive way for the various corporates. I think instead of too much regulation, perhaps it should be a lot of self-governance model, which may perhaps help for the country. And one thing also we need to be very careful about is, for example, we have seen instances like putting a ban on import of laptops, other things, which scares a lot of corporates doing business in India. I think that is something I would like to see more maturity, and especially in terms of implementation of law and on the criminal law. It would be a very negative effect if we have new criminal law in place, but the implementers of that law, whether it's a police, at the local level or at a higher level, if they misuse that law or if it is used for a political vendetta, that will be a sad day for me. I think we need to have that kind of an assurance that the change in criminal law will not be an impediment and will try and solve, as the Home Minister says, it is not about penalizing, it is about granting justice. And we have to really see that that intent is followed to the T. Granting justice under criminal law is the most important thing. We cannot afford to have situations where, jails are overpacked. So it has to be a speedier justice. We can't have a situation where courts are packed with such kind of cases. There has to be a faster way of doing it. Use of technology perhaps is the most important need today. And we should embrace that change in law because of technology. How will 3 crore cases get solved at the lower courts? How will 70 or 80,000 cases before the Supreme Court get solved? Unless we have a new law or we have technology to implement that law. I think those kind of things are very, very important for me when we talk about a new criminal law, but it has to be followed in the right intent.
Thanks a lot, Akhil. I think very well said. I think we'll see how that evolves and how people embrace it. Ashish, one question to you is, as an outside lawyer, how do you see the same thing, like with the change of the criminal bills? You obviously advise clients as they navigate the Indian Penal Code. How will that change now with the new criminal bills, especially around evidence? Because we all struggle with what is the right standard for evidence.
So, what these three new bills actually do is they somewhat consolidate the provisions of law that were already existing, and some that were sort of the gaps that were filled by the courts through various judgments and precedents over the years. So effectively, the law is not a complete sweeping change, which we don't know how it's going to pan out. Of course, the devil is in the detail, as Akhil said, but it's not a massive change that that nobody will be able to understand. What it does is that it fills out, like I said, it fills out the gaps which were already there through judicial precedents, etc. What's important is, especially since we are speaking about white-collar crimes today in this session, what's important is how companies would be affected by these new laws, etc. So if you look at the Bharatiya Sanhita, Nyaya Sanhita, which is the new penal code, it's a consolidation of the already existing laws that the companies primarily dealt with. So we were looking at cheating, misappropriation, criminal breach of trust, etc. And those sort of sections still find place in the new law, except that now they are consolidated into one section as opposed to two sections where one was a definition, the other was a punishment. Similarly, something new that has come about in addition to offenses such as hate crime or terrorism or organized crime is the definition of economic offense itself. But the economic offense has now been defined in the context of an organized crime syndicate. So it's not something that's applicable to everyone, but it does define it. And economic offenses within its realm today, as the bill defines it, consists of our, again, run-of-the-mill cheating, criminal breach of trust, forgery, falsification. But it also has certain really wide definitions, such as any unlawful activities which is leading to a financial scam, a mass marketing fraud, multi-level marketing fraud, something like these. So this is, it's a good thing that this bill has now gone to the parliamentary committee, because this has a tendency to be misused. I mean, there's definitely going to be a misuse now, especially considering the fact how our enforcement agencies have been working in the last few years, especially the Enforcement Directorate or the CBI. It's a matter of time till somebody comes up and says, look, there was a financial scam in your company, therefore, and 3 people were involved, therefore you're a crime syndicate. So, I mean, it's not far-fetched. It can happen. So those are things that we have to be, somewhat careful about. And I'm hoping that the parliamentary committee actually looks at these definitions and, only then the act is passed.
No, thanks for that, Ashish. Mini, coming straight to you, you're hearing a lot of changes in India. So how do you, from an outside-in perspective, sitting in Hong Kong, view all these changes, and a little bit about how you see international trends in US, Europe, and Asia Pac, and how you think India can learn from that?
It's a very small question. Thank you, Arpinder. I also thought this panel needed more diversity, which is why I volunteered. That's right. No, look, it's interesting because I think the Indian developments are very much based on legal frameworks. But I think the whole concept of white collar compliance is moving much more into the value chain proposition. And so there's a number of developments that I think are having a big influence in terms of encouraging companies to do the right thing, have ethical and integrity-based business performance. And the laws are kind of behind in many ways. I think, Samir, your point about whistleblowing is a really good one, because what we're seeing across Asia particularly is this increased speak-up culture. You've got younger generations who basically want companies to walk the talk. And if they don't, then they will speak up. Or they will walk literally out of the organisation. So you've got lots of other parties that have influence. So you've got activists, particularly on the shareholder activism level, who look very closely at companies in terms of what they disclose. You've got the ESG parameters. And I'm going to give a shameless plug to the ESG panel that I'm moderating tomorrow morning. But, that whole governance side is becoming a real currency. If you get it right, it actually means that you're worth more. You can attract capital, you can attract investment, you can attract the best talent. If you get it wrong, your reputation suffers tremendously. So from a global perspective, what I'm seeing is, you've got a number of different elements of white-collar conduct that within things like anti-money laundering, trade sanctions, bribery and corruption, and fraud. And what we must not sort of get brought into is dealing with all of these as individual silos, but instead bringing this into a framework of how do we do business and how do we represent ourselves. So I think the ESG drive in Europe, in the EU, is probably ahead of the curve. I know we've got new ESG disclosure requirements here in India, but that's very much a tick the box. Whereas what we're looking at out of the EU are things like compulsory due diligence, looking at risks, looking at the integrity of the businesses that are being acquired. You've got requirements in terms of governance frameworks right from the board level. So you've got boards now looking at governance at a much closer level. Look, I can tell you, I've been in this practice with Baker for 25 years, and nobody ever in the board level talked about compliance, but they talk about governance. And frankly, it is exactly the same thing, just with a very much nicer, sexier name. But it means something because it actually means that the company can be worth more. So what I'd like to sort of share with you is that is something that corporates in India would be well advised to really strengthen, because in fact it's going to mean that they will continue their leadership efforts and will demonstrate that they don't need new laws to make them stronger, healthier, more value-driven. They can actually do it because they believe in it, and they can then be recognised for it.
Thanks a lot, Mini. I think you do see that with a lot of the global companies and the way they operate in India and the asks they have. And that comes back to Vineet, actually. because he's one of those few Indian companies which is operating all over the world. So my first question to Vineet is, do you take the Indian standard outside or do you bring the global standard to India? That's my first question, which was not there in the predefined questions, by the way. But my second question is obviously data privacy. I think it impacts companies like you the most. So would love to for you to kick off the data privacy part of this whole world for this discussion.
So thank you for having me, firstly. Arpinder, you said first question, so I thought there would be many more. But, I'll take it from where many left. I think as Indian companies, and I will go through a journey actually. My journey has been largely IT companies. And our IT companies have grown substantially in the last 20 years. I've seen that growth. And I can tell you in the first 5 years in year 2000, we only saw companies just growing, hiring people, getting the business, compliance, and all of that was never thought about. I think it's Lehman Brothers, etc., when companies actually realized that compliance is important, and unless you have a compliant model, ethical ways of working, you're not going to survive. So I think that's where it all started with. And today where we are currently, and we talked about the 5 trillion economy dream, not dream, actually it's going to be a reality very soon, and 10 trillion as well. To my mind, there is no other way to attract FDI, build that confidence, etc., and have a structure which is compliant, which, Akhil, you talked about self-regulate. As IT companies, self-regulation has really worked, if you ask me. They've done very well. But at the same time, you can't probably apply it at all times. So you need those regulations, you need the best practices. And maybe therefore, to answer to your question, Arpinder, you really need to adopt the global practices. And that's what we've done, as I can share in the last 3-4 organizations that I've worked. We've really adopted all the best practices. You talked about board, sensitivity, etc. At the Mahindra Group, risk committee spends almost 1+ hours only discussing, potential issues, what has gone by in the last quarter, etc. So that's the kind of audience which it is getting from the board, etc. So I think that shows the culture. But coming back to the point, yes, we've adopted global practices. Let's give it to them. They have been advanced. I mean, the laws, the legislations, the practices have been done up much earlier. So I think why not take those practices? So we've adopted those practices. I've been witness to it. Whistleblower, yes, it's worked very well. And especially when you are in a people organization with 150,000 employees and potential what do I call it? Events happening. The TCS event is a big event. We talked about RMG hiring millions of dollars of monies gone wherever. So there is a lot of potential which is there, and therefore adopting the best practices is the best thing to do. We've done that, and I think all large organizations today follow it. The Indian companies for sure. There is no choice actually. So that's the first piece. And then on the second piece, I think the much awaited legislation on data privacy is there. Ulrich and me will speak tomorrow on the Brussels effect and how Europe is looking to say, we were the front runners, we did it, etc. But you know what? We had been having a lot of questions in the last 5-7 years from our global customers, potential customers, as to what are your privacy. What is that law that you guys follow? How do you ensure the data is safe here in India? And therefore, this law is most welcome. Of course, it's limited to digital data for at this point in time, but I'm sure we're going to see the Digital Act, etc., which will follow. And therefore, I think this act will do too good, and it's a very simple one. So it's not complicated. And then we've also seen decriminalization of a lot of offenses. That's a welcome step as well. So in the light of decriminalization of offenses, simplified acts, the rules hopefully will be good as well. So I'm hoping we will develop, or we'll have a better and a more robust system around addressing this issue of white collar crime. And as an organization, Tech Mahindra is one of those which absorbed Satyam Computers, and that was the first company to report a of the crimes of the old times. So we've seen how we cleaned it up, how we addressed all the litigations all over the world, all the class actions, cleaned it up, and see how it's running so very well. So I think that's the learning as well. You learn from US, UK, and other experiences. So I'm sure we are on track. Yeah.
In fact, Vineet, that brings up interest. We must do a separate session on how you managed to turn Satyam around. I didn't pick up on that before, but I think you've given us a good idea for the next session.
Yeah, Mr. Manoharan has written a book on this. I think you must look at that book, The Satyam Turnaround, and there is quite some material already, which actually gets into the acts that were, the actions that we went in. Yeah.
No, lovely. So, Sameet, coming back to you, 360 is, being a large company, obviously with everything going digital, a lot of the UPSI information being digital, you hear about insider trading as a serious concern in the white collar crime space. The SEBI chairman, there was a video which went viral, said that I'm going to catch every one of those inside traders and make sure no one escapes. And they have, I believe, surveillance teams. I've heard they have hired 300 investigators to keep a tab on people. So just your thoughts on how you stay compliant in this whole digital world and with insider trading.
Thanks for bringing this question. I think to me, it looks like the SEBI has gone overboard actually in some compliances, frankly, particularly when we see the latest LODR amendments and insider trading related things. I'm sure that, this is in the interest of investor, in the interest of general public. And so these are very good initiatives taken by SEBI. But at times it looks like that, only these few listed entities are only doing the crime or only doing the corruption, and, the rest of the countries, the rest of the corporates are not doing anything. That's something, the approach looks like SEBI is actually gone overboard. Many people have given certain suggestions, but they are not ready to listen. But that's okay, because as a compliance officer, I respect that, because one has to really see that each and everything is to be complied. But yeah, insider trading related things, it's actually a difficult task to to keep a track on the compliance of a listed entity. 2-3 things we know recently development are which are good step. Like for example, entering into the structural digital database. That has become a huge task now. It says that whenever the information starts, whether the information is concrete, not concrete, just a plan, the moment the information starts from one level to another level, you have to keep all the things ready in the structural database, which cannot be tampered, and it's very difficult in a large organization where we have 10 businesses, people sitting there, one business guy talking to another employee on something which, may not be aware of it. We may not be aware of it. People are not aware of it. But then, you have to be very careful in that things are actually being captured in the digital database, because the people came, actually inspected the things also. They verified that this is the good thing. We have been able to manage that digital database also. But I think, at some point of time, it looks like there should be some point from where it should go. For example, unless and until it goes to the board for approval, whether it's a UPSI, not UPSI, because you plant 100 things, one gets materialized. Out of all 90 things, whether it should be captured or not, but that's a matter of complete debate. But I think SEBI has done a wonderful job in terms of making the stringent laws in terms of there is no insider trading, and I think this is up to some extent giving some trouble to the people who are listed entities. But at the same time, there are other things also which now they have started. For example, like freezing the PAN of the designated person, during the window closure and all. So that's a good step actually, so that people don't do even, kai baar galti se ho jati hai trading. But in terms of other things, like one thing they have done very good is, like, they have also started a whistleblowing mechanism now in SEBI. If you give a tip to the SEBI and then you may be rewarded. I don't know whether people will actually give that or not. That's a challenge. It's still in India whether people are coming forward for the whistleblowing or not. But insider trading, it's actually compliance is actually a challenge, and we really have seen actually, the people ruining their money. We have seen the instances where actually people have done some kind of major price sensitive information related things. So I think overall, little bit difficult to comply with as of now, but as the things falling in line, people have started taking it in a very positive manner. 2-3 things which are still pending, like for example, latest SEBI regulation which says that there has to be a threshold to be informed to the stock exchanges. No, they have, what they have done is in the threshold, they have made it, for example, 2% of your turnover, 2% of your net worth, and 5% of your average profits. Now, if the company don't have a profit, for example, a company which has a high turnover, but the profits are very less, then, small information becomes a UPSI or a material information to be disclosed to the stock exchange. So these are all challenges which people are still facing, and representation have gone to SEBI. But overall, they have done a very good work in the last 5-10 years in terms of compliance of insider trading. They are very, very strict, and they actually ensure that no one gets out of it if they are doing anything in terms of insider trading. So I think it's a good thing for us, at least for compliance officer. I think it's a good thing.
No, thanks for that. I attended a training session yesterday for another tech company, and the CFO came in and said, "I just don't want anybody to trade in my stock." So he, in fact, said, "Let's keep it very simple. Forget about all the rules. Just don't trade in the company you work in. Can you just keep it simple? There are 1,000 stocks out there. Go trade in them. Do whatever you want. Just don't trade in our company's stock." Is the advice he gave.
No,
He said, "We can hear all the rules. There are hundreds of annexures, annexure C, annexure D. You can fill up the forms. You can have a trading plan." But he said, "Why do you want to deal with that? Because you will make mistakes. And
No,
then you will
but
get
thing
embarrassed."
is, Arvinder, the point here is that I agree with that. Even I, we have to give a lot of trainings to all the people to make them understand about the rules, and it's very difficult to make them understand because people sitting in research center or somewhere in the seats, he doesn't know anything about it, and he did some trading, for example. So we keep on giving all the trainings that please, don't even think of trading in our stock. But the point is, why can't we say, people want to invest in the company's stock because they want to grow with the company, number one. Number two, the company has ESOPs, ESPs. Ultimately, when they have stock, they have to trade in that. So the point is, we have to explain them that this is the right time to trade, this is not the right time to trade, and then make sure that if there is any information, don't pass on to anything, not to your spouse, not to your children, because that's something which has become offense. But how can you say that? I agree. Even I tell people, yeah, why do you have to trade in DCM Shriram stock? Yeah, there are thousands of more stocks. But then they say, no, we want to grow with the company. Tomorrow, we want to be part of the company as a stakeholder, number one. Number two, if the company is giving ESPs, ESOPs, etc., then they have to have these stocks and they have to trade in those stocks. So this situation is, always there, will continue, I'm sure.
But Arvinder, you also have tools now, I mean, which block. So I think companies have adopted those tools, etc. So you don't get to trade in those non-trading periods. And then there is this e-guidance, etc., which keeps flowing on your screensavers at all times. I mean, we're fed up of it actually. To read all of them, we actually start reading all of it. So, but these are guidelines and guidance which kind of are there from all time.
No,
to
I,
time.
I agree with you. I think the 2015 rules and then the 2020 amendment does bring out all those. But I think generally, I think what he meant was more try your best. If obviously, as you correctly said, you want to grow and be a part of it, you should go ahead, but then follow the rules. But another thing is on this digital thing, which I think I picked up from you. I've heard a lot of audits are happening from the regulator now in companies around this digital platform, which is
Correct.
becoming more onerous also.
No, so I think this is something, once it was started, SEBI said that we'll do an inspection or a kind of a review of the people or listed entities, whether they are maintaining it properly or not. Now, there are two ways of understanding this. One, the people took it that, oh, they are doing the inspection, let's get into this compliance, fall into compliance very quickly. The other way, I was thinking that SEBI is trying to understand whether it is feasible to have these kind of things or not. So my point was where the regulator is actually trying to understand from the listed entities whether this is something which is workable or you have any suggestion in that.
Right.
But once the inspection has started, and people have started coming to the listed entity, everyone was, no, before he comes, let us be very compliant with that.
Right.
We don't want to give any opportunity to them to say that we are not complying. And that's how what happens is every company has actually made one or the other system. And now SEBI says that, see, everyone is complying. Where's the problem? There's no complaints,
No, thanks for that, Sumit. Coming to Akhil. Akhil, talking about the Digital Personal Data Protection Bill, you're obviously a part of a global company. Obviously, there's GDPR, US laws, Indian laws. How do you navigate? Which law do you follow? Is it you're following the Indian law, the European law, the US law? You're also in the defense industry, right? I mean, technically, that's even more onerous, I believe. So, you want to share a little bit about how you navigate that?
Yeah, so in India, Indian law, of course, and so we do have global policies and procedures, which in any case we follow. So we have a global privacy office, which is based out of US, and the responsibility of that office is to ensure that data privacy regulations across the world are followed, but the problem lies that there is no one standard format how you follow globally. So they are also relying on us to navigate and tell them as to what are the data privacy regulations in India. So for India, as I see, the broad pillars are personal information, which is much wider than it used to be under the earlier law. It's much, much wider. Anything which identifies an individual is a personal information. Under the previous law, there were few instances which were classified as personal information. So the important thing is now you have to give a notice. Then you have to obtain a consent. You have to store the information securely. And then you have to, at the request of the data principal, you have to delete the data. So these are the important things which are required under the current law. But the problem area is, and I'm not saying problem, I think for all general counsels here, it's a great opportunity to participate in the compliance of what is a new law on data privacy. So it's a great opportunity. But I want to give 3 or 4 examples as to how to deal with this situation. I know that the new rules will come, and details will come in under the new regulations. But the first and foremost thing is, I have a director. He has filed or she has filed a DIR2. Under that DIR2, there is a lot of personal information. So under Companies Act, when you appoint a director, many information is provided for which you identify a person as an individual. That person resigns. And under the new law, that person notifies the company that please delete all my personal data. Will you follow the data privacy law or the Companies Act? Because under the Companies Act, whatever is the corporate record stays indefinitely. There is no data deletion requirement under the Companies Act. So which of the law will prevail? Second situation, I have an employee who leaves the organization and his or her information gets filed under the labor law. And that person says, I have resigned from the organization. Please remove all my data in your record and also in the government record. Which law will you follow? Data privacy or the labor law? Or the law where you sought that information for? So there is no clarity. The third situation is, I go to Vineet's office. He invites me for a cup of tea. I go to his reception. I give my personal information. When I go back, should I ask Vineet's reception to delete that information? How will that information be protected if I become a visitor, which will be very common? You go there, they will ask you for your ID, your information. Some companies have a scanning process. That information goes into the system of where I'm visiting. How will you tackle with the data privacy information? Is there a mechanism in place in Tech Mahindra that I go as a visitor and immediately that data gets deleted? How will we solve that problem? I don't think we have an answer today. The fourth situation is, a lot of companies work today on an outsourcing model. A lot of information data processing is outsourced. Contractually, it may be an easier way to do it, and then on email, you transmit those files. What is the compliance level that I will need from Tech Mahindra as a partner that such information Tech Mahindra is protected? Will there be some ISO certifications or standards? Under the current law, if you have an ISO 27001, at least you have a certificate that you are compliant under the current law. Nothing more is needed. A contract is needed. But under the new regulations, I do not know how will that happen. So a lot of questions. I'm sure we are living in a very interesting time when we are coming up with so many regulations. How will these be implemented is a question which we will only see in future.
Even I want to add one thing small. मेरे को याद आया and say when he was saying that the person leaves and you have to give the data to labor law and you have to give the data to ROC. Now SEBI has also put a condition that a senior management personnel, whenever he joins, you have to give the detail to SEBI. Whenever he leaves, you have to give the resignation letter to the SEBI, to the stock exchange. I mean, it was only to the KMPs as of now, or directors. Now every senior management personnel as defined there, whenever he leaves, you have to inform the stock exchange, SEBI, along with the resignation letter. Now, if he's written something in the resignation letter, it will go public. Now, again, if he says delete my data and all, it will problem.
No, I think the law of the land is important. You can't dispense with that. there is an additional example that I would like to add. You had these telecom rules, etc., which required you to maintain records for 1 year time, right? Of anything that's the incoming call to whatever, etc. Whereas for national security and other reasons, you said you need to retain it for a year, but the GDPR would not allow. So there is a conflict. So what do? I took opinion from Europe law firm, Indian law firm. They left it to me to say, you guys decide basis your contract, etc., which is not the correct answer if you ask me. So there will be problems, but I think we'll get some answers from the rules also. I don't know when they come soon. Hopefully. No, there will be some answers because GDPR is to my mind, a great regulation. And, and that's how we've lived for it for a couple of years now. So there will be learning and best practices which we will adopt, possibly in the rules.
Akhil, I'm going to add another question for that, which is all of the company data that's currently on social messaging apps. So part of the concern we have is that, in fact, a lot of business information is currently in a situation where it's not stored. It's not, there's no surveillance. There's no, oversight. And yet and this is a big focus coming from global. So in the US, there's a lot of enforcement action that you might be aware of, where in fact companies are being fined enormous sums of money because they've allowed these social messaging apps to be used for business conduct, and their failure to control that data is another risk element. And I suspect that's something that we'll be seeing here in India as well. But it's certainly about controlling data. I think data privacy legislation is a good start, but sometimes I think, again, the law is behind the times. And what we really need to see is more control over business data in a more holistic sense.
And also, it reminds me one more thing, since you were talking about the social media. Now, again, the SEBI rules now, which are yet to come in force, it says if there is any information on the media about your organization, in a social media or somewhere, you have to comply, you have to deny, or you have to admit, or you have to explain that to the stock exchanges and SEBI. Now, tell me, if some competitor of mine wanted to understand what is going on, in my deal and all, he will falsely put something in relation to that deal, that the company is doing that deal. Now, I have to either say, yes, I'm doing that deal, or I'm not into that deal, or I have to explain that this is under this stage or that stage. So these kind of compliance is very, very difficult, for a listed entity.
But Samit, I think we've put some structures in place in organizations where we've constituted committees, right?
Some SOPs as well.
We've done that. I mean, I think large organizations have done that. You run those decisions, pass those committees, get an answer, and then decide to report or not report.
SEBI says you have to inform in 12 hours.
Yeah, true.
That's the problem.
No, the CERT also requires data privacy immediate and so on.
I think the government has its hands full. I think I just asked a simple question, but obviously, it's like, the bees on its nest. But coming to it, I mean, think about my business, right? I do forensic investigations. I mean, I image computers, cell phones. How difficult will that be? Because you're imaging the cell phone, halfway through the person says, oh, I've changed my mind. I'm withdrawing my consent. Today, we kind of dance around it and say it's done. Now we'll figure out what happens. And then some smart employment lawyer decides to say, okay, go file a case against the company, the investigating firm. But it's generally done. I think today, now going forward, it will become very onerous, right? Because the person says, I've now changed my mind. Even though I've signed the consent form, I've signed something. What do you do in that situation? You have to give the data back.
I thought that would get covered under legitimate use, employment espionage, etc. Probably you will be able to still do it.
Yeah.
Some exception I or whatever. I don't know.
No, you're absolutely right. But we're waiting for the rules. Because we've actually, all of us have written clarification letters to the government saying, what do we do? Can we image a cell phone even if there's a consent? Can we image laptops? When you say personal information, standard thing is you see a bank statement on a computer. Can you look at it or can you not look at it? So these all become a bit tricky, which I think will require clarification.
Goodly use, not deemed use, but they call it a legitimate use.
Legitimate use. No, I'm going to hide behind that a lot, Vineet, and I'm going to quote your name. I said I spoke to Vineet and I'll tell the police officer that please talk to him. But it's getting very onerous. Now coming, Ashish, to you, you're the lawyer. How do you keep us all out to jail when we violate data privacy laws? I believe there's no criminal offense, is what Vineet told me. But the 500 crores seems like quite high. I can't afford it, but I like to.
No, it's a problem actually. The interplay of all laws in India have become a big issue, and especially in the last 6 months or so, where there is a new legislation or a new regulation coming out from every angle. You know, SEBI is releasing something, RBI is releasing something, central government is releasing something. Even if you look at the, earlier we were talking about the new laws. Once these new laws come into the picture, what happens to Prevention of Corruption Act? What happens to, the MACOCA, the Terrorism Act? What happens to So, I mean, it is a big problem. And eventually what it comes down to is how you govern your company. It comes down to what Mini was talking about is basically governance. And how do you escape? I wouldn't say compliance will get you out of it. Compliance is only something that you will eventually end up showing to the adjudicator or any judicial forum that, look, we had systems in place. But that is not something that will get you out of it. What will get you out of it is the governance. What Mini again spoke about, speak up culture. You know, inculcating those habits in the organization itself is what keeps you out of trouble. It's not reactionary. It's what you do beforehand is what saves you. So I'll come to you, sir, when you are actually there. Before that, I think it's up to the companies.
All right. No, thanks a lot, Ashish. So I'll come to my last two questions as I've got these things flashing in front of me. Last two questions, sir. So, Mini, to you, coming back to you, what are some of the key international developments which are contributing to the development of effective strategies for combating this whole public sector corruption on a global scale? So just a few quick pointers on that.
Yeah, so a number of things that we're seeing, I'm a member of the Patchy community with the WEF, and we talk about this a lot because public sector corruption, unfortunately, is still rife. COVID, I think, gave a little bit of a pause, which was helpful, but we're now seeing some of the same issues arising again. Transparency is the key. And I think with government regulations that promote transparency from a procurement side, that's actually helping a lot. In other words, when you put in a bid for a public project, you actually have to list all of the different entities that you're going to engage with, every subcontractor, every vendor, etc. And that's quite helpful because it stops these sort of hidden third parties being utilised for improper purposes. I know that a number of countries have introduced that, including in China, which has actually changed and improved some of the public sector procurement corruption issues. But, at the end of the day, you really have to train your people to understand what's important and not to just buy business for the sake of buying business. So they need to be able to say no. And this is, again, coming back to the speak up culture. They need to be able to seek guidance when they're being pressured. They need business to support where they do the right thing. So in other words, bonuses not just being paid for successful business acquisition, but also bonuses potentially being paid when you say no for the right reason. So there's a number of factors, but we're short of time.
No, but Mini, I think this is very important. I think sanctions globally, working with the public sector, these are big deals. So I think it does matter. I know I've got somebody sitting to imprison me on the right-hand side. So, but my last question to close with is Vineet. So Vineet, any last comments as you're the person on the right-hand side would you like to give just to close this session off?
I think transparency, there is no substitute to that. And there is no shortcut actually. So you need to follow the law. You like it or you don't like it. But there we are seeing ease of justice. Hopefully we will see this mediation bill and then so on and so forth. So hopefully there are things, and we've talked about ED and other powers and superpowers, etc. So that will continue in some form or the other. But I think there is no substitute. Transparency and adopt to global practices, I think, fall in line. That's my key.
Okay. Thanks to all the panelists, and thanks for all of you to hear us. So thanks a lot.